Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation, Spotlight on Black Female Authors. My name is Jose, and I'm a librarian here at LA County Library, and I am joined by my co-presenter. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Silvia Torres, and I'm a librarian with our Adult Digital Services team. Welcome.
So now, before we get started, I do want to take a moment of your time to read our land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tangva, Tatavian, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardships of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native people and local tribal governments, including, in no particular order, the Tatavian Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tangba Indians of California Tribal Council, the Gabrielino Tangba San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and the San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. Thank you. And with that, I will pass it over to Ana Silvia to get us started.
Thanks, Jose. All right, let's get started. Again, everybody, my name is Ana Silvia Torres, and I'm a librarian here at LA County Library, and I will get us started today. And the first book that I have to share with you all today is called A Stranger in Alondria by Sofia Samatar. So the way that this will work for me is I'll first read you the synopsis of the book, and then I'll share a little bit about the author, and then I'll give you my thoughts. So, A Stranger in Alondra is about a boy named Javik, and he's a pepper merchant's son, and he's been raised on stories of Alondria, a distant land where books are as common as they are rare in his home. When his father dies and Javik takes his place on the yearly selling trip to Alondra, Javik's life is as close to perfect as he can imagine. But just as he revels in Alondria's Rabelaisian feast of birds, he is pulled drastically off course and becomes haunted by the ghost of an illiterate young girl. In desperation, Javik seeks the aid of Alandrian priests and quickly becomes a pawn in the struggle between the Empire's two most powerful cults. Yet even as the country shimmers on the cusp of war, he must face his ghost and learn her story before he has any chance of becoming free by setting her free. An ordeal that challenges his understanding of art and life, home and exile, and the limits of that seductive necromancy reading. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Sophia Samatar. She's a writer of fiction and nonfiction, including the memoir The White Mosque, a Jane Stein Award finalist. Her works range from the award winning epic fantasy A Stranger in Alondria to Opacities, a nonfiction book about writing, publishing, and friendship. She's of American, Somali, and Swiss Mennonite background. She holds a PhD in African languages and literature, and she lives in Virginia. So now let me give you my thoughts. First of all, I will say that I am a Sophia Samatar fangirl. I will read anything that she writes, and I have actually really been wanting to talk about her and her books. So I'm very excited for the opportunity to finally be able to do so. This is one of my favorite books ever. I'm a big fantasy and sci-fi fan, and when I first picked up this book, I just fell in love with it, and I've read it, I think, about 3 times. And the reason why I love it is just I love Sophia Samatar's writing. It's so beautiful, it's so poetic. And when you step into these worlds, especially her fantasy worlds, you feel like these places are real. She has such a descriptive way of describing the mundane things like food and in such a rich and colorful language. So, A Stranger in Alondria, as I mentioned, follows the story of Jevik, who grew up on an island hearing stories of Alondria, and all he wanted to do is travel there. And he had this sort of a mystical feeling towards it. And I think those of us can relate to it. Those of us that love to travel and didn't grow up traveling but wanted to as children, we have these places in our minds that are fantastical and we make them so great and grand in our minds. And for Javik, Alondra was that place. And he finally gets to go there, and he's kind of thrust into it's everything that he imagined, but he's also thrust into this world of war that he doesn't quite understand. And so you go you with him as he is a stranger, and we as well as the reader, we're strangers in this land. So we're learning everything with him and who's who, and the politics and the religion and the different cultural backgrounds of everybody else. It's a very diverse world. And as I said, Sophia Samatar really paints this world with such a colorful brush, and when you read it, you feel like you're immersed in it. So also, it, it really touches on books and the power of books and storytelling, as Jevik becomes haunted by the young illiterate girl that I mentioned in the synopsis. He himself has to tap into those words to write the story, because that's the only way that he can kind of let go of what he's been through in his experience in Alondra, and the war that he's sort of between these two cults and these two factions that he's found himself in. He goes through a lot within such a short period of time. And I think for me, the symbolism of Jevik writing the story of this young girl is, I think a lot of us sometimes use writing or whatever our creative outlet is to sort of let go of what we've been through. And it's such a cathartic experience when it's finally done and we're able to, whether we're writers, painters, whatever it is that we use as our medium for art, to be able to finally let it out in that way is such a cathartic feeling. And I found that, and I felt that with Javik when he sits down and writes and writes and writes. And yeah, there's just so much that I can say about this book. I can go on and on. As I said, I've read it so many times. But I think that if you're somebody who really enjoys books about identity and creativity and books and storytelling, then I think you'll really like this one. And if you like books with some really rich, nuanced characters and a world that feels real, I think this rivals books like Game of Thrones with how amazing and three-dimensional Sophia Samatar makes this world. There's a companion novel called The Winged Histories. It takes place in this same world. So if you find that after you read A Stranger in Alondria, you want more of this world, which I think that you will, because I would still read another book of hers if she wrote it in this world, then there's definitely that companion novel called The Winged Histories. So I highly recommend A Stranger in Alondria. I hope that you enjoy it. I think that you will, like I said, if you're a fan of fantasy. And yes, on to my next book. Oops, what's going on? There we go. My next book is The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl by Issa Rae. And here's the synopsis for Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. I'm awkward and black. Someone once told me those two were the worst things anyone could be. That someone was right. Where do I start? Being an introvert as well as funny, according to the Los Angeles Times, in a word that glorifies cool, isn't easy. But when Issa Rae, the creator of the Shorty Award-winning hit series The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, is that introvert, whether she's navigating love, the workplace, friendships, or rapping, it sure is entertainment. Now, in the New York Times bestselling debut collection, within her witty and self-deprecating voice, Rae covers everything from cybersexing in the early days of the internet to deflecting unsolicited comments on weight gain, from navigating the perils of eating out alone and public displays of affection to learning to accept yourself, natural hair and all. The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl is a book no one, awkward, cool, black, white, or other will want to miss. So I'll tell you a little bit about Issa Rae if you haven't heard of her before. Her name is Joissa Rae Dope, known professionally as Issa Rae, and she's an American actress, writer, producer, and director, and she's best known for co-creating, co-writing, and starring in the HBO show Insecure, which has been nominated for Golden Globe, Critics' Choice Awards, and BET Awards. Rae is also the founder of Hooray Media. In February 2025, it was announced that Rae would be a keynote speaker at the South by Southwest conference and festival. So now, let me give you my thoughts. And I don't typically like memoirs. It's just a genre I don't care that much about, especially celebrity memoirs. I have to really be invested in a person's life to want to sit down and read a book about them. But I'm a huge Issa Rae fan, and Insecure is one of my favorite shows. And I find myself gravitating towards Issa Rae, probably because I also identify as awkward. So reading this felt very uncomfortable, but also very relatable. If you've seen Issa Rae's show Insecure and her other works, then I think that you really will enjoy her memoir. And I'll admit it was a bit more serious at times than I thought, as Issa touches on hurtful, sometimes traumatic moments of her past, but she does so with such a relatable insight. And she sheds a light on stereotypes that are often follow Black women. You know, she tells us not all Black women know how to dance or know about fashion or, have the stereotypes that we all know of, that we know, but these stereotypes still follow them in their work and in their personal lives. So she really just dismantles those and shows us the multifaceted life of Black women, which I really appreciated. And then parts of the book take place in Los Angeles, where she grew up for the majority of her childhood. So for those of us that are from here, it was really neat to see those references to South LA and South Central, and she shares portraits of life as a Black child and the woman that she is, and how she got to where she is, and how she built herself up to be the successful person that she is today, and all of the awkward experiences along the way. And for anybody that feels introverted, shy, awkward, it really is empowering to see that you can still break these ceilings and these boundaries that sometimes we ourselves don't think that we can, because we tell ourselves, "Oh, I'm awkward, I'm shy, I'm introverted." But to see someone who identifies that way and to be able to do so in such a really colorful and magnetic way was really inspiring to read about. She's also very honest about some of the things that she's done in her past. She doesn't try to sugarcoat some of her experiences, such as when she catfished people in the early days of online chats. She was a catfisher. Her some of the things that she's done in relationships and her family dynamic as well. She's really honest about her life and doesn't try to paint herself as this perfect person. She's very honest and about who she is and what she's done and what she wants to accomplish in her life now that she is in the position that she is. And one of the my favorite quotes from the book is in reference to her favorite Junot Diaz quotes, who's an author if you haven't heard of Junot Diaz, and this is what she writes in reference to his quote. You guys know about vampires. You know vampires have no reflections in a mirror. There's this idea that monsters don't have reflections in a mirror. And what I've always thought isn't that monsters don't have reflections in a mirror. It's that if you want to make a human being into a monster, deny them at the cultural level any reflection of themselves. And growing up, I felt like a monster in some ways. I didn't see myself reflected at all. I was like, yo, is something wrong with me? That's the whole society seems to think that people like me don't exist. And part of what inspired me was this deep desire that before I died, I would make a couple of mirrors, that would make some mirrors so that kids like me could see themselves reflected back and might not feel so monstrous for it. And I thought that was really beautiful. And like I said, I really felt like I've identified with a lot of Issa Rae's work. She really does show a different side of entertainment for women, for Black women, that is relatable. It's and she touches on so many different things. And if you're a Issa Rae fan, I think you'll like it. If you're new to Issa Rae's work, I think you'll like it. And definitely laugh at some of her misadventures and her awkwardness. I think you'll really appreciate the chapter as well, where she touches on the fact that she can't dance. I literally laughed out loud at that one. So that is The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl by Issa Rae. My next book is My Sister the Serial Killer by Okinkan Braithwaite. And this is let me tell you about what this is about. So, when Coraday's dinner is interrupted one night by a distress call from her sister, Iola, she knows what's expected of her: bleach, rubber gloves, nerves of steel, and a strong stomach. This will be a third boyfriend Iola's dispatched in, quote, self defense, and the third mess that her lethal little sibling has left Coraday to clear away. She should probably go to the police for the good of the menfolk of Nigeria, but she loves her sister, and as they say, family always comes first. Until that is, Iola starts dating the doctor where Cora Day works as a nurse. Corday's long been in love with him and isn't prepared to see him wind up with a knife in his back, but to save one would mean sacrificing the other. My Sister the Serial Killer is a blackly comic novel about how blood is thicker and more difficult to get out of the carpet than water. Okinan Braithwaite was born in 1988 as a Nigerian British novelist and writer. She was born in Lagos and spent her childhood in both Nigeria and the UK. She's best known for her debut novel, My Sister the Serial Killer. So my thoughts about this book, I don't know, tell me why I found a book about a serial killer really funny, but I did. The book is narrated by Cora Day, a nurse whose only friends are her sister and her comatose patients. She's pretty antisocial. And the problem is obviously that patients can't talk back, so she ends up divulging a lot of her secrets to them, which may or may not come back to bite her. Um, and her sister is a serial killer so she constantly has to clean up her mess. Iola. Corday's sister is described as beautiful and all the men want her. The problem is that she ends up killing all of her boyfriends in strange ways. Every time that Corday shows up, she simply says she had to, it was self-defense, but she never really describes why. And when she shows up and helps her, it's always, you have to stop doing this, and it's always she's a bit of an enabler, as you'll quickly learn very early on in the book. Even though it's funny, the book was funny just because it's very satirical, very dark in that way. We see the psyche of Viola, both women actually, and how this beautiful woman, while not justifiable in what she does, which is kill, she's able to detach because she herself isn't really treated like a person. She never really has been ever since her childhood. Her beauty sort of blinds men around her. So they only see a beautiful woman, they don't see anything else. And so she's oftentimes treated as property or currency, and just kind of want her on their arm because they want a beautiful woman, but they don't see her as anything other than that. So I think that we see a little bit of why she's able to detach, because I think when you're sort of denied your humanity, then it's easy for you to sort of detach from it yourself. Um, we oftentimes also see Corday's point of view as well as being the sister of the woman who gets so much attention, including from the man that she herself has been in love with for quite some time, and how that how she isn't quite able to detach from her sister, but we sort of see the hurt that that causes her. And for the first time in her life, even though she knows what her sister does is wrong, she never really she'll say she'll stop, but she never really does until this affects her on a more personal level. And then we also dive deeper into the story. We are seeing that we see the society at large as well, how it treats a beautiful woman and what is deemed a non-attractive woman, and how sometimes when you see a person, you think, how do they act this way? How could they possibly be a murderer or a serial killer? And one of my favorite quotes from this book was Corday. She says, "The most loving parents and relatives commit murder with smiles on their faces. They force us to destroy the person we really are, a subtle kind of murder." And while I think that was really a beautiful thing to read, but I think it showed us how as I said before, when you're sort of denied your humanity by the people that love you and they don't see you as anything more, Iola isn't seen as anything more than a beautiful woman, even by her family at times. And Corday isn't seen as anything other than a nurse, the responsible sister. No one ever really takes the time to ask her what she wants out of her life or how these actions affect her. That can also feel like a death for for the family member as well. So there's different kinds of murder happening in the book. And while it's told in a very satirical manner, it is a very deep and complex book, I found. And it's a very small book. I think you can probably knock it out in a couple days. And it is entertaining. As I said, it was funny despite the subject matter. I found myself laughing at the shenanigans that Iola and Corday get themselves into, and the explanations and the cluelessness of the people around them, and the little sort of random little things that happen along the way. So if you're a fan of dark satire and introspective reads, then I think that you'll like My Sister the Serial Killer. And then on to my last book. I tried to touch on a little bit of everything. So I gave you fantasy, I gave you memoir, I gave you crime, and now I'm going to give you romance. When I Think of You is about Kalia Wilson. And Kalia Wilson has paid her dues. But all the years behind the reception desk at a flashy film studio have only pushed her movie making dreams further out of reach. That is, until a surprise reunion presents an opportunity that could make her career or break her heart a second time. It's been 7 years since Kalia's whirlwind romance with Danny Prescott went up in flames. While her passions have stalled, his career is taking off. So when the hotshot director reappears to offer her a job on his production, it's a shock to the system. Working with Danny may recapture the intensity of their film school days, but trusting him again won't come as easily. As the pair allows themselves the openness and vulnerability to entrust their deepest truths to each other, the possibility of a true connection draws even closer. But when Hollywood politics and a scandal threaten to sink the production of her career, Kalia may have to risk everything to do what's right, even if it means letting go of the second chance love of a lifetime. Maya Ariel is the author of the debut contemporary romance When I Think of You. Her early love of movies led her from Arkansas to New York City, where she earned a BA in cinema studies from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. She also holds an MA in specialized journalism for the arts from USC Annenberg. For several years, Maya worked across multiple roles in the film and entertainment industry before pivoting to work in academia. As a medical mom and hopeless romantic, Maya is passionate about inclusive love stories. And here are my thoughts about When I Think of You. If you're a fan of second chance romance tropes, then I think that you will enjoy this one. The novel centers around Kalia and Daniel, who met as college students in New York and fell in love. And what I found interesting about this second chance romance is that, unlike a lot of second chance romances where sometimes it's just down to a simple miscommunication that could have easily been solved had both parties just sat down and talked about it. That's can be really frustrating. Can be both very satisfying and angsty as a reader, but also really frustrating. If you're a fan of second chance romances, then you probably know what I'm talking about, where all you want to do is just grab them and sit them down and have them hash it out. And we get that here. We do get some communications that could have been settled with just more open and clear communication, but it's more than that. It's definitely more than that on both of their parts. And so that's what I found interesting about them is that they meet, they fall in love, and then they go their own separate ways. And in the meantime, both of them are still going on with their lives and still building what they want, their futures that they want separately, but they haven't quite been able to forget about the other one. And when we meet Kali in present day, she's still trying to make it in the film industry. She's working jobs that she's overqualified for, but she knows that she has to sort of put in the work. And then she's hoping one day to get her big break. And that's when Daniel steps back into the picture, who is starting to make a name for himself. Also, the benefit that he's a nepo baby. His father was a famous film director. So we also see that. What I also liked about this book is if you're a fan of films, if you're a fan of, or if you want to break into the film industry, I think it paints a very realistic picture of what that world looks like, right? If it's all about who you know. Um, Danny, he's a talented director, but he got a lot of where he's where he's at a lot because of his father, who was a famous director. So as I mentioned, he's a nepo baby. And then Kalia has been working her way up since she got out of college, just working as many jobs as she possibly can, and not even getting close to where Danny has been able to get to with his leg up because of who his father and the connections that he was able to build there. And then when they do come back after 7 years later, after they went their separate ways, you can still feel that they have a lot of love and respect for each other. And it's still frustrating because you can see it and you see them trying to fight it. And that's that angsty part of romance that I personally really love. But I think we also see that while these two do love each other, they also are their own people and they're not ready to just go back into a relationship that ended on such a sour note. They still want to make sure that they are still their individual selves. And if they do try to give this another shot, what that would look like. And maybe they aren't ready to give it another shot. Maybe they still have work to do independently without the other. Who knows, right? That's what you'll find when you read the book, whether or not they're ready to give each other that second chance, whether they're able to grow together or separately the way that they have in this last 7 years apart. So I really love films, so I also really enjoyed learning about new films that are brought up. There were some films that I'd never heard of before, so I added them to my list of films that I went and watched after I read the book. And personally for me, the second chance romance trope is my favorite. So I really enjoyed reading this one. And um And I think you will too, whether you like second chances or not. I think that you'll enjoy reading about these two really funny and also there are funny side characters. So there's definitely some comedic moments in the book, but how these two come back to each other and their careers in the film industry. So that is my last pick for you, When I Think of You by Maya Ariel. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jose.
Hey, Anna Sylvia. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm definitely not a second romance type of person. Only because when they have those miscommunications, I just want to kind of throw the book across the room. So, I read romance. I think people have a misunderstanding of how difficult it is to write a romance because you're expecting those tropes, right? You're expecting those that same thing to happen. So it's putting that twist that really makes a good romance title. Um, but just I mean, just to let y'all know, we just make sure that Anna Sylvia and I just make sure that we're not reading the same titles, but I'm experiencing Anna Sylvia's titles just as you are. It's the first time I'm hearing her reviews. She's an awesome reviewer, and I really appreciate that. I'm definitely gonna check out that Issa Rae book. Junto Diaz is one of my favorite authors, and I would say he's my one of my go-to authors, except he hasn't put anything out in about 13 years. So Junto, if you're out there, I need a new book by you because the three that you have put out have been truly masterful. Uh, the Wonderful Life, Brief Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde is incredible. This is How You Lose Her is amazing. So the kind of little side ones that y'all might want to check out. So I do have four titles of my own. So I'll go ahead and ask Anna Sylvia to share her screen once more time to get going with my titles. So my first title is Rare at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. Jacqueline Woodson is an American writer who is best known for her work in children's literature. Her books such as Brown Girl Rising and After Tupac and Foster have been Newbery Honor books. And for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with um, with children's literature, the Newbery Honor is kind of like the Pulitzer Prize, right? It's the top book for children's literature, and I can honestly spend our whole time together just listing all of her awards, and all of them much deserved. She has served as the Young People's Laureate, I believe, from 2015 to 2017. And Woodson's writing is known for breaking down stereotypes and limitations placed on the characters by society. Uh, they are the vast majority of her titles are told from a female point of view, which is amazing, especially when talking about children's literature, right? To give young women strong female characters is incredible. Her willingness to deal with hard topics such as teenage pregnancy, race and poverty, among other topics, have led for many of her titles to be challenged. But this is the reason why these need to be read. The title that we'll be talking about today is written for adults, but it can be enjoyed by teens. So Red at the Bone was released in 2019, and it tells a multi-generational story of two families from different socioeconomic worlds connected through a teenage pregnancy. The story is told through a series of flashbacks, and we slowly learn the hard choices each member of those families have to make this life work and the fallout that that causes. And the story begins with the kind of debutante for Melody, the child born from that teenage pregnancy to her mother Iris and father Aubrey. Melody is wearing the dress intended for her mother, who never gets to wear it due to the pregnancy. So this title is a beautifully written book. It's short at under 200 pages, but it's full of imagery and history. Woodson uses less words, but the words she does choose to use are powerful. She allows them to breathe and allows the reader to explore them and find the meaning and their place in the story and the larger context of the issues she is dealing with. We first see these during the start of the story when during Melody's debutante party, and her grandmother is consistently correcting Madeli's language, her posture, and even her musical choices for the party. And this is a constant reminder that as a person of color, they need to constantly prove themselves and always be on their best behavior. Aubrey is not as privileged as Melody. He is born to a single mother who struggles. Yet all the notions and imageries of one might put on a person from the wrong side of the tracks are completely dismantled by Aubrey and his mother. Red at the Bone deals with the challenges of being a teenage parent, the choices made by all those involved in raising the child while dealing with the challenges of race. I almost wish this was just the start of a series of books. It is a fascinating tale that I absolutely love. All of Jacqueline Woodson's books are incredible. If you have a middle-aged, middle school child in your life, place any of her books in their hands, and they're absolute wonderful. This book might be short in words and pages, but it is large on ideas and the story. I found this book absolutely fascinating. I devoured it in, I believe, in a day, maybe a day and a half, because I needed to know what happened. And when I talk about the short on words, there's a brief mention of the Tulsa race riots that happened in the early 1920s in Oklahoma, and the unwillingness of her family to ever step foot back in Oklahoma, and the need to hold on to history, the need to hold on to every single little thing that they had, because everything was lost because a series of white people were mad that people of color were having a better lifestyle than them. And that episode kind of trickles through the entire story, and Melody's family and their need to constantly prove themselves and show that they are better than everybody else, and they're as good as their white counterparts. Jacqueline Woodson is a beautiful, beautiful author, and all her books are highly recommended. On to our next title. So our next title is Good Dirt by Charmaine Wilkinson. Wilkinson is a Jamaican American writer who spent the majority of her youth in Jamaica, and I believe now lives in Italy, specifically Rome. Originally known as a journalist, her debut novel, Black Cake, shot her into stardom. Her much anticipated follow-up, Good Dirt, was released last month. So if you're interested in this book, you probably are gonna have a hold list for this title, but it's worth it. So Good Dirt tells the story of Abby as she untangles the connections between the loss of a loved one and the loss of a valued family heirloom, a large stoneware jar, which I had little knowledge of the importance of pottery, in our history. The novel starts with two life-changing events for Abby, one in her past and one in her present. The tragic murder of her 14-year-old brother when she was 10, and during this murder, that precious family heirloom, the jar, was broken during the attempted robbery. And then years later, we are thrusted into Ebony's wedding, only for her to be left at the altar. What follows is the story that deals with race, grief, and trauma. Much like our previous title, this novel is multi-generational. Where Jacqueline Woods' novel goes back 3 generations, this story goes back 6 generations. And again, it's also anchored by a strong female character. Ebony is the daughter of an elite Black family, the Freemans, who can trace their history back to the 1600s, and whose story is told in part by this family heirloom. They were a revolutionary family owning land back in the 1600s. I mean, can you imagine a Black family owning land in the 1600s in America? And they continue to be revolutionary. The Freemans are one of the few Black families in an exclusive New England area. When tragedy strikes in the murder of Baz, the older brother, they are thrown into the spotlight, because the question is, did this happen because they were Black? Would this have happened to a white family? The Freemans are again thrown into the spotlight when Ebony is left at the altar by Henry, the son of one of an equally elite but white Pepper family. We are then trusted into the history of the jar, the unsolved mystery of Baz, and the grief of that loss. Um, for me, the most captivating storyline, although we do have multiple storylines in this book, is the story of the jar, which is commonly known as Mo in the story. Through the jar, Wilkerson is able to capture the importance of African Americans in the history of the United States. We get a glimpse at the unimaginable struggles, abuse, and endurance of enslaved Africans and their determination and ability to overcome and succeed. It reminds me of how much of America's history continues to be untold as we miss this important portion of American history. Uh, and there's a brief mention, and this is one of my favorite parts of the book. There's a brief mention after Evie is left at the altar that she should head over to Martha's Vineyard to kind of cool off and let the everything kind of drown out, and people move on from her being left at the altar. And as some of you might know, Martha's Vineyard is a small island off the Massachusetts coast, and it's currently famous because I believe the Obamas still own property there. But the Obamas own property there because it has a rich history of being a place welcoming to middle class and upper class African American families. The one of the towns in Martha's Vineyard, Oak Bluff, has something that was originally termed Inkwell Beach, which was kind of a derogatory term because this is where African American families could come and spend their summers. But the African American community has taken hold of Inkwell Beach, and it's now a point of pride. And if you go out in the summer, this area is still thriving with African American families. And so that's some of that history that kind of Wilkerson brings up, kind of drops little nuggets of information. And she does a great job at the end of telling how she did her research for this book. So if you read this book, I encourage you to read that end portion and dive into this untold history that is very important for us. And we also see how loss and grief can and does affect those who are left behind. Through each member of the Freeman family, we see how the loss of Baz affects her every day. They question the choices they made long before the tragedy and the effects that the grief is having on the choices they are making today. Wilkerson does a wonderful job of reminding us that we are the sum parts of not only our choices, but the choices and lives of those who came before us. I thoroughly enjoyed this book because it made me look at grief and unresolved grief. It made me look at race relations and how we still look at people from different races who stayed with kind of a little side eye and question, are they good enough, or why are they dating someone from another race? Um, and looking into that history and how important it is to have a complete view of our history. So I highly recommend this book. It made me discover and look for other books and continue to discover our American history. So now we'll move on to my third book, which is The Final Revival of Opal and Neve by Dawnie Walton. Dawnie Walton is an American journalist and writer. She earned her FMA from the prestigious Iowa Writers Workshop. And to my understanding, this is the toughest place to get your MFA. So Ms. Walton must be is an incredible writer. Walton has worked as the editor for Life Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, and Essence. Walton was working at Essence when she began work on this title. She actually quit her job at Essence to dedicate herself to writing this debut novel, The Final Revival of Opal and Neve, which was released in 2021. The Final Revival of Opal and Neve tells the story of an interracial rock duo from the 1970s. The novel is written in an oral history style, which gives it a very authentic feel. The story begins in the present day when Sonny Shelton, the editor of a music magazine, is looking to interview Opal and Neve as she wants to write a book about their short-lived but important musical career. Why does she want to do this? Well, it turns out that she's the daughter of Jimmy Curtis, the married drummer of the band who was having an affair with Opal at the time. Opal is a strong Black woman, while Neve is a British songwriter looking to make his fortune in America. Opal and Neve connect to make what turns out to be just an okay album that would have disappeared into the bargain bin if not for what happened one night during one of their shows. And I'll leave you on that cliffhanger as with the summary of the book. Um, I've seen many people compare this novel to Daisy Jones and the Six. And yes, it's a book about a band in the late 60s, early 70s. And yes, it's written in an oral history style. But many music history books and entertainment books are written in a oral history style. So I think both authors are using this way of telling a story because it's a known way of telling stories of music and entertainment. And I've read many of these stories, many of these books, and Sylvia could attest to that, both real and fiction. And this novel sits right on top as one of the best. Opal is an extraordinary character. Through her, Walton shows the struggles faced not only by a woman, but a woman of color trying to make it in the music industry. I read that Walton was inspired to write this novel after watching 20 Feet from Stardom, which is a documentary which tells the story of female Black singers uh, who worked with some of the most famous bands in the world, including the Rolling Stones and David Bowie. This document came out in around 2013. So if you haven't seen that and you enjoy this book, please check that documentary out. It's one of my favorites. Back to the book, sorry. Opal is a no-nonsense and goes after what she wants, while Nev is much more mellow and, like many people, is often too scared to speak up for what's right. And many times he takes full advantage of being a white man in this society. Through this book, Walton shows the importance of imagery and race relations in the 1970s, and in my opinion, is truly asking, have we moved forward from that? Um, Truth be told, I listened to this book and it's read by a full cast, which I think is important when dealing with an oral history. So if you enjoy audiobooks, I highly recommend this as an audiobook because each character has their own reader, and it really brings the story to life to the point where you start wondering if this is an actual thing that happened or a work of fiction. Um, the author really digs into race relations and how simple imagery, in this case, the Confederate flag, what that symbolizes to different people and how tragedy could strike with a simple with this imagery of this flag. I truly enjoyed this book. I think it's one of my favorites, and I think it's one of Obama's favorites as well. So please check this title out. And finally, I will wrap up with a nonfiction title. This is My Black Country by Alice Rendell. Alice Rendell is one of the first Black females to write a #1 country song, X's and O's, recorded by Trisha Yearwood in 1994. She has over 40 songwriting credits to her name. And in addition to that, she's a New York Times bestselling author. Her first book, The Wind Dawn Gone, is a satirical retelling of Gone with the Wind. She's also written award-winning cookbooks. And Rendell is also a professor at Vanderbilt University, where she teaches courses of the intersection of African American culture with literature, film, food, and country music. And in this story, Randall weaves an incredible nonfiction tale um, through her own story of how she came to be a successful country music writer. We learn about the deep and lasting impact Black musicians had on country music. Rendell teaches us the history her father told her. We all know about the Carters, right? We know June Carter Cash. We know the history of her family. But through her, we learned that Mother Carter learned her craft from a Black guitarist named Isa Rydell. We learn about Charlie Parker, one of the greatest country singers who happens to be Black. Bailey was not only one of the first country stars back in the 1920s, he was also one of the first performers on the Grand Ole Opry. And we're reminded that Ray Charles had one of the best-selling country albums of the 1960s through his title, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. As we're taken to Black Country Music School, Rendell is taken to the School of Life. As she takes her songs to Nashville and is turned away by multiple recording companies, only to be praised by those same companies years later. Turned away for being a woman, turned away for being Black, but her talent would not be denied. This is a history book and a memoir, and much like some of the other tales, so much of the other titles that I talked about today, it reminds us of that hidden history of America. My reason for reading and reviewing this book came from a conversation I had with a member of my family while watching the Christmas Day NFL games. As Beyonce came on, my family member screamed, "Beyonce can't do country." and it shocked me and it hurt me. I had to quickly tell them that country music is Black music. It also made me realize that Black country music is a blind spot for me, and I quickly dove into this title. If you're at all interested in music, I highly recommend this title. You don't need to be a country music fan to appreciate the impact African Americans have had on this music. The story of Randell is also very inspirational. She's a Harvard grad who moved to Nashville to become a writer. And one of the most important lines in this book, she talks about how she overhears someone that a white man say, "I have to compete with a Black women Harvard grad," except he did not use the word Black. So it really speaks to how Randell has to overcome the fact that she is a woman, that she is Black, and that she is educated to be successful in the country music industry of Nashville. There's also a companion CD that contains some of Randell's biggest hits, and we have a couple of copies of that CD in our system, so you could request that after you finish reading her book. And those are my four titles.
Thanks, Jose. Those were some really great recommendations. Yes, as Jose said, we haven't read. We usually don't read the same books, or maybe there's sometimes a cross between the two of them. So I'm learning about these books, and I was writing down the ones that, I mean, I want to read all of them, but Opal and Nev, I want to see if it's available because I definitely want to read that one. I also enjoy reading about music and music history and books that sort of bring us back into a moment in time. That's sort of that kind of intersects stardom and the artists behind all of that. So definitely all of them are now on my list, but I definitely am going to start with that one as soon as possible. So thank you for your recommendations and your reviews. So let's see if there are any, if you have any questions for Jose and I, please place those in the Q&A. Let's see, what are people saying?
So, as I mentioned this, we are recording this, and Monday morning you'll receive an edited version of this, along with the PDF that includes the links to all of the books that we reviewed. You didn't catch the links here. I'll also include the link to the couple of other titles that I talked about, by Punto Diaz, and I do believe we should have 20 Feet from Stardom somewhere in our collection, so include that. And also, if you enjoyed our program today, we'll be doing another program in March. That time during that program, we'll be talking about women's history, focusing on women's history written by women. I'll drop the link to register that right now. So if you want to join us for that. And I don't see any questions. Do you see anything, Ana Sylvia?
No, I just want to let everybody know that I posted Jose's books in the chat, so you can go ahead and click those links. But no, I don't see any questions. Just people liked our recommendations. They liked your recommendations. So my favorite recent read by Black Woman, A Burst of Light, Audre Lorde, Raylene Packle Reed. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Michael.
I did see someone recommend We Need New Names. It is an excellent novel, and I'll actually include that one. That's one of my favorite books, but I opted to do something different. But I'll definitely include that with a little write-up as well. And so with that, I do want to thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. See you next time.